In her talks, Laurie introduces the power of community building to make leaders of organizations more effective and successful, and to support the mental health and retention of employees. Community building, not team building, they are not the same, is relationship building, and relationships form the foundation of any successful collaborative endeavor. I'm happy to introduce Laurie Gosselin, who will talk to us today about her efforts at building community. Laurie.
Thank you. Before I put up my slideshow, I just want to say that I am aware that when I address a Rotary Club, I am preaching to the choir. I know you guys have a bead on community, but hopefully I can offer some other dimensions or layers that you might not have considered. So I have a short slideshow, and then we'll have a Q&A. So please write down any questions that you have. So when we come back and I say who has a question, I want to see like everyone's hands up. That's thinking very positively. Okay, so I'll start the slideshow. Okay. Since COVID-19 struck, we have heard the word community more than ever before. When we think of community, we tend to think of groups like these. But what if there is more to community than what can be defined by geographical boundaries and shared interests? What if something is missing from our definition of community? I want to share my perception of community with you, and I'll start by telling you a short but true story. One day, I had to pick up a package at the house of an acquaintance. So I drove up the boulevard and I pulled into the driveway. I walked up the walk to the front door and I rang the bell. She opened the door and welcomed me into her foyer. It was spacious and elegantly decorated. When she left me to get the package, I peered around the corner and saw a room that could have been on the cover of a decorating magazine. It was beautiful, and it was neat and clean, and it was quiet. And as I stood there, this uncomfortable feeling came over me, that it felt as if no one actually lived in the house. It was a beautiful house, but it didn't feel like a home. Later that week, I went for the first time to visit a new friend. I drove up the road, I pulled into the driveway, I walked through the carport to the side door, and I rang the bell. She opened the door and welcomed me into her kitchen, where I could see she'd been baking. I could smell the cake she'd just taken from the oven that was cooling on a wooden rack. I could see bowls and flour and utensils across the countertops and in the sink. Through the window over the sink, I could see trees in the backyard and hear birds at the feeder. The entire kitchen was flooded with light and with warmth, and I knew this was not just a house, it was a home. Community is home. It's a place where you belong and you feel it. It's a place where you are seen and heard and understood and accepted for exactly who you are. It's a place where you're important to the people there, just because you're there. Everybody needs that place in their lives. Well, it's understandable that there's confusion about the word community. Our perception of community was formed in childhood by what we saw of the community of the past. Stories our grandparents told us, what we saw on old TV shows and movies, what we read in books. But community has been evolving, keeping pace with human evolution, keeping pace with our needs. For instance, for our cave-dwelling ancestors, community meant survival. You needed to be a part of a community then. For the early settlers to North America, community meant support. So if your crops failed or your barn burnt down, people would come together and help you. And for the immigrants who landed on the shores of North America at the beginning of the last century, community meant protection in an alien land. I used to think I was born at the wrong time because in the past, there was community in the world. I think of households where 3 generations lived under one roof, the older people helping the younger people with child rearing, household and farm chores, the younger people spending time with the older people. There was always someone at home for the children. But then I wondered if I hadn't been looking at the community of the past through rose-tinted lens, because when I leaned in and listened, I heard things like Suck it up, Buttercup. It's not the end of the world. Boys don't cry. Men don't cry. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Children are to be seen and not heard. And the world doesn't owe you a living. The community of the past was tough. It had to be. Those were tough times. The community of the past was a physical community. It was all about survival. Now, community today is still about survival, only in a different way. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had that sensation of feeling alone in a crowd? Have you ever been in the midst of a social gathering or a family gathering or even a work meeting and thought, it's like no one here even knows me? If you have, you're not alone. A 2018 article in the New York Times said that 13% of Americans felt no one really knew them. In his book, Them, author Ben Sass said that by the middle of the last decade, 25% of Americans felt they had no one to talk to about the things that mattered. And a 2018 New Cigna study on loneliness found that 50% of Americans sometimes or always feel alone. We now have a loneliness epidemic considered more harmful to human health than cancer, heart disease, smoking, or obesity. A loneliness epidemic. What are we to do about that? Well, I say we build more community, and we build it in all the places we dwell. Now, you might notice I added an 8th item to the list. Should we build community at work? Do we need community at work? Do we need dessert with a meal? No, but it's not about need, is it? It's about making the experience that much more pleasant. When we're talking about the workplace, it's more than that too. When there is community in the workplace, the people want to stay there. People are happy there, and mental health is supported there. So yes, in the past, community was physical, but today, we are not concerned about saber-toothed tigers or hostile environments. Today, our struggles are with anxiety, depression, addiction, loneliness, and despair. Our struggles are no longer physical, they're emotional. So if we want to talk about community building, we need to zero in. How does it look? How do its members act? And how does it feel to be a part of this community? I'll answer these questions by going over the 7 pillars of community, 7 characteristics that define a community. First one is commitment. A community is a group of people who are committed to one another and to the group itself. This commitment is very important because it lays the foundation for community building, and it becomes the glue that helps to keep the group together. This is another word we're hearing a lot today. When I say a community is inclusive, I don't mean that it is inclusive only of all people, but also of all diversity, and not just ethnic and religious diversity, but cognitive diversity. Are different ideas welcome here? Physical diversity, intellectual diversity. How many degrees do I need to have before my voice is respected here? Economic diversity, diversity of life experience, of sexual orientation, and emotional diversity. Is my anger welcome here? What if I'm feeling sad today? Do I need to hide that? And when you have a group of people who are committed and inclusive to that degree, you have a safe space where it's perfectly okay to be exactly who you are. And with those 3 characteristics, you have a highly supportive place. So if you're a part of a community of 20 people, that means there are 19 people in the world who have your back in a meaningful way. This pillar most distinguishes a community from all other groups, and that's the shape of its power structure. A community is not shaped like a pyramid with people in power at the top and everyone else beneath. A community is shaped more like a circle of people around a campfire where everyone's gifts and talents and ideas come to the table. In a true community, there's no power struggle because you don't need to struggle for power when you already have it. Now, with the 5 characteristics I've just described, with commitment, inclusivity, authenticity, support, and shared leadership, Imagine how amazing the communication will be. And with that caliber of communication, how effective will the collaboration be? Finally, and one of my favorite reasons for building community is the camaraderie you enjoy with a group of people who've evolved through the community building process together. So here again are the 7 pillars of community. Most of us at some time or other have been a part of a group that enjoyed 2, maybe 3 or 4 of these characteristics. But imagine how it feels to be a part of a group that enjoys all 7. So how do groups get here? How do groups become communities? There are 3 ways. The first way is organically. This is when a group of people are together on a regular basis. Say a Rotary club that meets once a week, or a knitting club or a book club that meets once a month. Over time, these groups may organically, naturally evolve into community, which is our natural state. We yearn for community. The second way groups become communities is through a crisis. And if you'll recall what we saw on the news when the cathedral at Notre Dame was burning, we saw strangers linking arms with strangers, singing and crying and praying together. During a crisis, the feeling of connection and closeness is so strong that often, after the crisis has abated, people miss that. But we don't need a crisis in order to enjoy that caliber of connection. We can build community intentionally, consciously, and this is what I teach people how to do. So there is a process by which groups become communities. This was introduced to me by Scott Peck, who wrote The Different Drum, Community Making and Peace, which was published over 30 years ago. In this book, he outlines 4 stages on the community building path. The first one he called pseudo-community. This one we have all experienced. When a group of people come together for the first time, they are naturally kind and accommodating and welcoming to one another. They look for things they have in common. This is natural. This is human nature. We want to belong. We want to be a part of the group and be liked by the group. But if the group stays together long enough, sooner or later, someone is bound to say, wait a minute, I'm not so happy with the way things are going. Or I have an issue with you. I have a problem with you. And when someone has the courage to be authentic, they can cast the entire group into stage 2, chaos. Now, chaos is a stage of crisis, it's a stage of confrontation, and we don't like that. When a group finds itself in chaos, they will try to get out of chaos. They will sometimes try to backpedal into pseudo-community. We'll just go along with things. We'll pretend everything's fine. That's not going to work anymore. Sometimes when a group reaches chaos, members will quit. Well, this isn't what I signed up for. Why am I wasting my time here? Sometimes the entire group will break apart and they'll think that something has gone wrong. But chaos doesn't represent something gone wrong. It represents the group's forward evolution into community. And when at least one person in the group is familiar with this process, they will recognize what is happening. And when you recognize that you're in chaos, you know what to do. And that is to evolve to stage 3, emptiness. Now, stage 3 doesn't look like a whole lot more fun than chaos. And that's because it's not. It's a stage of surrender. In emptiness, we need to look at the issues that were raised in chaos, and we need to address them personally. Who triggered me? What happened that pushed my button? Who am I judging? What is it that I need to control? In emptiness, the entire group needs to pause and go inside and explore these things. And when a group can pause and stay in emptiness long enough, they can evolve into community. Now, right about now, I imagine someone is wondering, is she just talking about team building? No. Community building is very different from team building, and we're coming to the end. But let me go over 3 ways they're different. First is in participation. Team building is usually fairly mandatory. The manager comes out and says, guys, we're doing team building today. But community building must be voluntary. We never force anyone to participate because you need to commit to a process that, as you've seen, isn't always easy. Second difference is in the goals. Team building is a series of exercises designed to help the members of the group work together better. It's about strategy. Community building is a process that facilitates the growth of relationships among the members of a group. It's about culture. And I'm sure you're all familiar with what Peter Drucker said about culture. Final difference I'll go over is in the outcomes. So the group goes away and does team building for a day, a weekend. They develop some camaraderie, but when they come back to work, it's pretty much business as usual. But when a group goes through a community building process together, it transforms the group. It's never again business as usual. Let's look at these outcomes. So how can I say that community building will do this for a group? I can say it because community building is relationship building, and relationships form the foundation of any collaboration. If we neglect this foundation, all the problems we're going to have down the road are going to lead us right back to it. Let's see what Scott Peck said about the relationships in a community. He defines community as a group of individuals who have learned how to communicate honestly with each other, whose relationships go deeper than their masks of composure, and who have developed some significant commitment to rejoice together, mourn together, and to delight in each other, make others' conditions our own. He also said this, which I profoundly agree with. I believe that through community building, we can achieve world peace because community building makes everyone us. And it's very hard to judge and condemn someone you consider one of us. Now, does that mean that community building makes us all the same? No. This is not a depiction of a community. This is. So I want to thank you for listening. We're going to have a Q&A in a second, but I want to put this slide up in case you want to take a screenshot so you can capture my contact info. Also, I wanted to show you the cover of my book. I named it Sounding the Drum in honor of Scott Peck, whose work in the different drum I sought to bring forward into the digital age. And it's available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback format. So I'll ready to stop the slide show. Okay.
Thank you, Lori.
So who has, oh, yay. Thank you, David. What's your question?
David Allen, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate the reference to Scott Peck. About 35 years ago, I read The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck, and it had a profound effect on my life. So I haven't read the book that you were referring to, but to me, Rotary is exactly the kind of organization that you're talking about that is about building community. For people who care about the quality of life in the Upper Valley and the world at large, I don't think there's a better organization to belong to than Rotary. And as I listen to your 7 pillars of community building, I think we do pretty well on most of them, but inclusivity is probably our weakest link. And that's partly the history of Rotary. Rotary was founded as business leaders, men initially, and so it was sort of an elitist by design organization, and it's changed over the years. It's been many decades since we included women, but we still I don't think that we reach through all economic strata. I don't think that we have a diversity of membership that reflects certainly age distribution, but also race, ethnicity. There are a number of different criteria. And so fixing that has been something that's been talked about. How do we become more inclusive? And I think part of the strategy that we're trying to employ is being less about just our weekly meetings. I mean, I think historically Rotary has been known well, you get together once a week and you meet with all your friends and experience fellowship, and more towards
Excuse me.
the project work that we do. Ginny, could you put yourself on mute? And more towards the project work that we do in the community, the work we do with youth, the youth we do with, Ginny, you popped off of mute again. The work we do with charities, the work we do fundraising, etc. What other advice would you have for, you've spoken to a lot of different Rotary clubs, what other advice would you have for Rotary clubs to become more inclusive?
Believe it or not, that's the first time I'm hearing this question. I think we don't want to do sort of a token representation, right? I think we attract people to ourselves. So the energy of your core group, as you build community together, is going to be attractive to other people. And I know that in some of the different things I've been involved with in my life, I was invited, right? I was invited to be on this board. I was invited to get involved with this, where I might not have felt that I should just volunteer. And it might just be about inviting, always inviting. Come, and not just come and join us, but maybe come and check us out. Come to our intro party, or when you have, what do you call them, where you introduce you have a thing where you do a little speech, your own
Classification speech.
Yes. So maybe, invite them when someone's doing an interesting classification thing, or maybe even have a little Rotary party where everyone brings a guest and you have a funny mug with your coffee, assuming you're still meeting online, right? Or do something offline when you're able to do that, where people can just come and look and not feel pressured to join, but just see. And then if your group they'll either resonate with the group or they won't. But I really think there's great power in just inviting people. And I don't mean to say that maybe you're already all doing that all the time, but I would always be inviting, always be inviting. Just come and see us, and make the meeting very interesting and sort of a community building kind of meeting, so that they don't just hear the business, but they hear the personal and the passion that you have.
Yeah, sorry.
Just a reflection there, that David, that worldwide we're over 1 million members, and there are places in countries in Africa that have 5 Rotary clubs per city, and every country you can imagine. I mean, we have inclusivity. Unfortunately, it's not all together. And maybe we need to figure out ways to, now that Zoom is with us, to meet with other Rotary clubs from other countries, invite them to be with us online, so at least we can extend a hand that way.
And that would be a great opportunity to actually do some actual community building exercises, because clearly they wouldn't be a part of your community. But in the back of my book, I include a large appendix of exercises. So the book is a very simple step-by-step. This is what community is, how it feels, how it grows, how you can facilitate it. And, you could use 1 or 2 of the exercises in the back when you join with another club and really get to know them. Because relationship building, right? You all have relationships together, but you don't have them with these clubs. And that's how you would sort of break down unfamiliar boundaries, like boundaries of unfamiliarity, and create familiarity with other people. So we're naturally not familiar with everybody in every culture. We don't know about it. We have our own ignorance about it. And until we know, we don't know. And sometimes we don't know that we don't know, right? So the power in relationship building there is huge.
Bruce.
Yes, thanks for the interesting talk. I just had one, it's more of a comment than a question. At the very beginning, you had lists of different types of what people think of as communities, not your definition of a community, but you had like clubs and town and so on. What I noticed what wasn't on your list was neighborhoods or schools, and they seem pretty important. Do you have any comments on that?
Neighborhoods. I love the neighborhood idea, because I think that is probably for most of us our first experience of community. But not every neighborhood is community. I know I could add that to the list. I noticed if you think about back, I don't know, 40, 50 years ago, people had front porches and they would sit on their front porches and they would greet and connect with their neighbors. And if you look around now, and maybe not in your area, but I notice that most people now have back decks and high walled back decks. So we're not in the front connecting, we're in the back. But the funny thing is, since COVID started, I noticed people pulling out lawn chairs and sitting in their driveways. People wanted to connect with one another. They recognized what we've been missing. Schools, I think there's a huge opportunity in this education system. And one of my passions is to teach teachers how to build community in the classroom. So children are raised with the frameworks of community and they develop a community consciousness. So a child who either is raised in a home that's a community or gets that when they reach school will not leave a kid sitting by themselves on the playground, will not sit by while someone is bullied. They will have a sense of, no, that's us. We're all part of this. We can't let people be treated that way. So I think it's important to teach teachers how to do that in the classroom. I mean, the frameworks they're beautiful, like values to teach by. But yeah, that's one of my biggest dreams is to get to, and I think the only way is to get to the teachers while they're still in school, because once they're in school, wow, they have no time. They have no time. But no, I'll think about that, neighborhood and schools.
Carol.
And,
Yes. Yeah, I wanted to ask you if you're familiar with this book. It's called The Upswing.
mm-hmm.
Are you? By Robert
Yes.
Putnam? Yeah. It focuses a lot on the economic impact of the move from strong communitarianism that lasted through the 60s to kind of where we are now, where we have 1% of the population has 60% of our assets and wealth. And how the impact that's had. So what's your take on the connection between, the economy and well-being on that level versus what it used to be?
It's funny that you asked that. I actually studied his first book, Bowling Alone.
Yeah.
The prior book. I researched that quite a bit when I was writing my book. And I found in that book, he couldn't quite say what happened. Like, why did social connectedness peak around 1959 and then decline and never stop declining? And I did start into The Upswing. I don't know if I read it all. I went through it a bit. And it was very recently that I had a thought that one of the major impacts, one of the major things changing in the world around 59 and 60 is that women were entering the workforce. So, and not always because they wanted to, I think because they had to, because of economics, because of taxation, because of everything was getting so expensive, inflation, right? And I think that when you take a family unit, say of 4 people, dad goes to work, now mom goes to work, kids go to daycare, you fractured something important. So when a mom comes home or dad comes home, they can't go bowling at night. They need to do homework. They need to make lunches for the next day. They want to spend time with their children. And I think that might be that economic reason might be the greatest reason that we've lost that whole sense of community. You maybe don't even have time to sit on the front porch and greet your neighbors. You're too busy if you've been working all day. So I'm not sure. I don't know if he came to an answer in that, but I think the connection is in taxation, inflation, and economics. I think it's been very, very hard for us even to do the things we know are good for us, right? Because we don't have time. We don't have time.
Ginya, you're on mute. Ginya, you're on mute.
Okay, I
Yeah.
apologize for earlier. I'm having a little problem with this mute, unmute button. I was interested in the process you were describing, where you talk about chaos, and then that evolves into emptiness. And I was curious about how in the most successful communities, the stage of emptiness is resolved or evolves into community. And who takes responsibility and how is it done?
Well, I think we have to back up to a group deciding they want to build community together. So community building is something we do as a group. We do with the group. It's not something we do to the group, because that's an organization. That you can do in no time. This is what we're going to do. Here are the rules, follow them. But community building is much more organic. But there needs to be someone who's facilitating, who's moderating the discussion, who's guiding, right? So the first thing this person will do is have an intention. I would like to see us do community building. I'd like to see us evolve into a community. The next thing they need to do is inspire the group. This is what I see. This is what's possible. This is a value in community. So what do you think? Should we have a community building experience here or an experiment here? And once they get the commitment of the people, they can quickly outline the process. This is what we're likely to go through. This is what most groups go through. And then you just go to work. You do some community building exercises, which, like I said in the book, and you don't have to do anything about chaos. It's going to happen. It won't happen right away because the group has to feel somewhat comfortable together before someone is willing to voice an opposing view or speak out. So it takes a little time to build that comfort. You start to build the relationships. But when chaos happens, the leader, the moderator can say, oh, look at that. It looks like we're in chaos. So now, even though they heard it the first time, they probably didn't really get it. And so you can explain a bit more. Well, we're in chaos. We're actually being authentic. We're telling one another how we really feel. But we need to think about this because we're also pointing fingers. You know, we're disagreeing on things without really listening to one another. And maybe we need to be quiet. Maybe we need to take a 15-minute break and think about what it is that's bothering us. What's going on here? How do we really feel? What is it we're trying to control that we maybe shouldn't need to control? What do we need to communicate about better? And that, in Scott Peck's day, when he would encourage them to just take a break, sometimes they would just go, I mean, these were all-day workshops. Maybe they'd take an hour break and they would come back and it would shift. They would have gone into emptiness on their own because it's an inside job. It's an individual personal job. And the group, when they came back, would have shifted. The energy would have shifted and they would start talking in a different way. It's, you know, Scott Peck used to work with groups and like in huge auditoriums or gymnasiums, it'd be like a weekend thing. And he would draw them into community, which was easy, I guess, in their day because there were some issues that just naturally came to the surface and caused the chaos. And he would work with them, he would walk them through it. But I have developed the process. Scott Peck wrote about community building, but he didn't tell how to do it, how to facilitate it. And it took me 3 years to work that out and to refine it and to simplify it for my book. But I really think that true community is extremely rare. I mean, there's different levels of community, right? We have different community feelings, but this kind of community that I'm talking about that any of us can build, I think it's extremely rare. And it's not cut and dried. It's not just do this and just do that. It's an intuitive, it's a very soft process where you feel your way and you work with the group and you just really feel your way through it.
Yeah.
Yes.
The problem is that people move around a lot. So Jenny and I live in a community and it's a pretty tight community, but I think of associations and clubs around the country. And I've been involved with one for almost 40 years now, the Association for Experiential Education. And I'd say that we have a community of the diehards who've been with that organization forever, going to regional and annual conferences and being in touch with each other on a regular basis. And I think that's one way to do it these days, because being in a neighborhood is great as long as you're there for a period of time.
So that's organic community building, that you've grown into community over time, and that's fine, and that's great. What I teach, what I want to write about is how we can actually facilitate that sooner than over time, like more consciously, more deliberately, with the engagement of the group, right? With the consciousness, awareness of the group. Because I think with that awareness, we have more ability to help the group through emptiness, to point out what's going on, because it's like, okay, well, we're going to build this community, and we knew it wasn't going to be easy, and now it looks like we're in chaos. So we know what to do because we care about this. We are committed to this. We are doing this together. So how do we handle this? And you don't just come out with, as a leader, you don't come out with all the answers. You let the group find the answers. It's a different kind of leadership, community leadership. I actually have I have one more community leadership workshop. I do them online. I have one more before the summer, and I'm not sure when I'll be doing them again because I'm getting busy, but I've been offering one free participation space to each Rotary Club I'm speaking to. So if anyone is resonating with this, just get in touch with me after the meeting, and more than one person can come, but I waive the fee for the first one, like for one.
Thank you, Lori. Wayne has your contact information. He sends out a weekly newsletter on Mondays, so he'll include that in the next newsletter.
Okay.
Any other questions for Lori? Lori, we want to thank you. That was very insightful. A great presentation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.
Okay.
We're going to
All the
move on to
best.
the business portion of our meeting.
Okay, I will leave you to it.
Thank you.